In the news, there's always a story behind a story. There's always a bigger picture amidst all the clutter that we have of information in our lives. And that's what we're going to focus on today at Smarter News. I'm glad to see everybody. Thank you for joining us for Scoop, where we give you a scoop of news, like the really good stuff that you need for the week ahead. So you feel prepped and ready and prepared for the stories that at least we know about at this time. Of course, anything can happen. Life is unpredictable, but there are some things that we can dig into. And that's what we're going to do today. As I was looking at the stories in front of us, I thought there's a lot of headlines that keep on getting recycled, but no one's sort of taking that big step back to say, well, this is really what this story is about. And here's what's really at stake. We get a little caught up in the details, and that's natural. We all do it in our own lives, don't we? You get really focused on the details. It's hard to pull yourself back and say, okay, here's the bigger picture. But that's what we're going to do today. We're going to go through a couple of the big stories just to have on your radar. And then we're going to talk about two legal cases that I think are really important that aren't really getting the coverage that perhaps another news cycle they may, or they may not. But I think they're really interesting. So that's what we're going to do here. That's what happens when you run your own news platform. You get to make these sort of editorial decisions. But I actually do think these stories are really interesting. One is a case out of Washington, D.C., one's a case out of Louisiana. So let's just jump right in. We have Congress in session. We have a whole bunch of different hearings that are going to happen on Capitol Hill on a whole bunch of different topics. So you're going to see sound bites throughout the week, whether it's from the acting attorney general or otherwise, testifying in front of Congress. As you know, those testimonies can be combative. They can start their own news cycle. So simply knowing that Congress is in session and hearings are taking place before the Memorial Day holiday is important. So we have lawmakers back in town, and this is going to be a lively week. We have President Trump returning from China. This was a historic trip, and as we talked about last week, one of the things we were looking for at Smarter News is whether or not there would actually be any news. It was really a question for us going into this story about feeling rather than necessarily content. Would there be a big blow up and a disagreement? Would there be a coming together of sorts and an announcement? But really, what we were wondering is what would be the feeling on the other side of this trip? That could actually be the most important thing here. And as we looked at the news over the weekend, obviously paying attention to President Trump meeting different variety of meetings that were happening in China, you could come back and say, well, no news is good news or no news is no news. It depends on how you look at it. There's not like this huge headline coming off this trip, other than these two leaders that represent the two largest economies in the world seem to get along. And there wasn't this flashy headline, good or bad, coming out of this trip. We woke up this morning, though, to some news from the White House as they're trying to create a summary of the trip and perhaps also trying to drive a news cycle in the aftermath of it. The White House is in their interest to say this trip was very productive, and perhaps we'll see whether or not that's the case. There were a couple parts of this announcement I just want you to know about, including the fact that it looks like there is an invitation to President Xi for a visit to Washington, which would be really another historic moment between our two countries if that actually took place. Remember, these two leaders, President Trump and President Xi, have met on the sidelines of a whole bunch of different global meetings that take place over the last several years, but it's different when they go to each other's homes or home offices, for lack of a better term, but which is the White House serves as both. So we're going to be really watching to see if that takes place. There was also an announcement of some sort of an agreement, if you will, about Iran not getting a nuclear weapon and sort of some loose language around some business deals, including buying Boeing planes, that China was in the preliminary process of that, that there would be some more purchases of agricultural goods from American farmers, that the market would reopen to beef and other items. All of these could be really big stories if they come to fruition other in a more detailed way than we're getting in this announcement. So I want you to know that this announcement is being made from the White House saying this was a very positive trip. Here's a couple of the good things that are coming out of it. And then we'll wait and see what that actually looks like in practicality. But that's what's happening now. The president has a lot in front of him still. Obviously, after a little bit of a break from the Middle East in his travels to Asia, he comes back to the United States, and we see on social media and otherwise the conversation really returns to Iran, where we don't have a lot of progress to report of any sort of developments on that front. We're in this period of time, though, where politically we're seeing the pressure rise on lawmakers. And that's because we're moving in to the midterm season. We're already there because we know the midterms are coming up in November, but we're getting closer. And for example, this week we have 6 states where we're having primary elections. The states include Alabama, Georgia, Idaho, Kentucky, Oregon and Pennsylvania. So these primary elections are really important because they're going to determine who actually winds up on the ballot. And that's good. It also tells us a little bit about how voters are feeling about whether it's President Trump or different issues that a particular politician has charged forward with, and whether or not that said politician is reelected to be in the primary process to be on the ballot in November. So as these primary elections are taking place, the realization that we're in an election period is dawning on everybody, the media, the politicians that are running. And so this will be a very interesting time to watch to see which politicians continue to fall in step with the Trump administration if they're Republicans, and how do the Democrats formulate their message to the American people to try to win back the House and the Senate. So this is all going to get the temperature is already turning up a little bit. It's going to turn up even more over the next several weeks because we're going to be right into that election period as we get into the weeks before the midterms. On that note, there was some news this weekend out of the state of Louisiana. Just by chance, I'm going to be talking about that state later. But you may see this headline. I want to talk to you a little bit about it because it also shows this mistake at times by the media to take a headline, repeat it, and maybe not give it the context that it needs. I know that sounds shocking, but really, in this case, I think this is important. So, Senator Cassidy was a high profile senator in the Senate from Louisiana. He also is a trained physician. So he broke with the Trump administration in a few different ways. He voted against President Trump in some high profile capacities, but he also was weary, pardon me, is wary, probably weary as well, wary and weary of Secretary Kennedy and Health and Human Services and the direction of the country's healthcare policies. So he broke with the Republicans and he did not win his primary. He actually lost. There were 3 candidates in that race, and he came in last, according to the latest data that we have. And sometimes those things kind of get sifted out a little bit, but as of right now, he's completely out. The headline around the country is he broke with Trump, he got punished, and he didn't win. Now that may be absolutely a factor. We see that President Trump's endorsement in different races can mean a lot. In some races, doesn't mean as much. But in Louisiana, I just want to point out there were 2 strong Republican candidates with very well known platforms and name recognition. One, Julia Letlow, it was a wife of a congressman who was elected and unfortunately passed away due to complications related to COVID-19. He was never able to assume office, but she assumed office in his place. By the way, widow succession is actually a process in Congress that we've seen for more than 100 years. So if a congressman dies, his wife can step in either as a placeholder or sometimes will take that role for longer. She in this particular case, ran for reelection and won. And she's been a successful congresswoman in the state. Now she's running for Senate. So people knew her story and knew something about her. The other candidate is the state treasurer. So someone else that people are familiar with. So I just caution you, it's this is true of the Trump administration and true of the press in where these 2 entities clash a lot, the press and the president, they clash a lot. One thing they're similar about is they like to make everything about the Trump administration. And sometimes that is not the full story. So we got to be really careful here. Doesn't mean Senator Cassidy wasn't impacted by his breaking with President Trump. That is probably true. It is also true that there were other strong candidates in the race. So keep that in mind when you see these headlines. Well, are the other folks that were on the ticket, were they well recognized, well liked in their communities? Or are these nobodies that just are winning because no one wants to vote for the guy that voted against President Trump or didn't get his endorsement? It's just a little bit more nuanced, just something I think is important to keep in mind as we're moving towards this election period where the president will certainly be in focus and rightfully so. But let's also consider that every state has its own issues. Politics is local, as they say. And so we don't want to forget that. And if you have any thoughts on that in Louisiana, I look forward to hearing from you specifically as well. One of these uh, positions or policy issues that is going to come up undoubtedly in this election has to do with the economy. And the economy is undoubtedly impacted by what's happening with the war with Iran. And I wanted you to hear this one soundbite with Senator Graham. He was speaking on Meet the Press with Kristen Welker. She asked a very pointed question. So I'm going to play the whole segment for you because I want you to hear the setup and I want you to hear his response.
Takes me to my next question because 70% of Americans in a new poll say President Trump is doing a bad job on the economy, the
Yeah,
number one issue for voters,
sure.
as you know. Bottom line, is it worth losing the midterms if the result is a non-nuclear Iran?
It's worth losing my job. If I had to give my job up to make sure Iran would never have a nuclear weapon, I would do it.
Would you give up the House and the Senate?
I would give up politically. The most important thing I can do with the job I've been given is to protect the American people. Now, you don't have to agree with me, but I've been this way for 20 years. I believe they're religious Nazis in Iran. If they had a nuclear weapon, they would use it. They've been trying to get one. They've been cheating. Obama and Biden were jokes when it came to containing Iran. Trump is doing something people should have done a long time ago. But here's the good news. Gas prices will come down when you put Iran in a box. Saudi-Israel peace will become possible when you put Iran in a box. The upside of dealing with Iran is enormously good, but you got to deal with them.
So I'm curious what you think about that. Senator Graham is saying this is worth it. And by the way, he has been very outspoken when it comes to his support for Israel and his efforts against the regime in Iran. So he's very clear about that. As he mentioned, 20 years, I would say consistently, Senator Graham has been on this hill. I don't know how many Republicans will agree with him. And that's going to be the big question going into the midterm elections. How many Republicans say, you know what, this is worth it? If I lose my job, fine, because this is a big enough issue. Iran has been a state sponsor of terrorism since 1984. We have an opportunity for a change in this country that will impact generations of Americans to come. I will die on that hill. Or how many lawmakers will say, the pressure is too hot? Gas prices are too high. Inflation is hurting our constituents, and this is not worth it. We have lost the story here. That's going to be the big story, one of the many big stories going into the midterm elections. While we have a lot of politics at play, there was something that happened just yesterday in Washington, D.C. I wanted to show it to you. It was a day of prayer. And I didn't really know that much about this. Apologies to those that maybe were a part of it or knew about it going into it. I didn't know too much about this event. And when I saw the director of national intelligence come out with a video that she put on social media about it, I was like, wait a minute, is this real? Let me just play part of the video.
250 years ago today, on May 17th, 1776, the Second Continental Congress called for a day of humility, fasting, and prayer. Just weeks before they declared independence, our founders didn't stride forward in pride. They knelt. They asked for God's mercy. They asked for his guidance because they knew that the cause before them was beyond their own strength. Now today, exactly 250 years later, we gather here on the National Mall to do the same, to give thanks, to ask for forgiveness, and to humbly ask once more for God's mercy and guidance as we enter the next 250 years of this republic.
Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard there. So she went on a little further. And so this is why May 17th was chosen. And I thought, is that real? You can't help but ask these questions, guys, right? There's so much coming at us. I thought, is May 17th, 1776, is that a date that I completely missed? And the answer is yes. Actually, it was a date that I completely missed. But the reality is even more curious than that. Let me see if I could pull up one of these images that I have for you, which is an image from the Library of Congress, which is from May 16th, 1776. John Hancock wrote this, and it was calling for a day of prayer and fasting and reflection, just like the director of national intelligence summarized for us. And this actually took place at a pretty regular cadence throughout the colonies, as there was a feeling very clearly in this time that war was on the horizon. And can you imagine the feeling in communities of something foreboding that's coming? You know, at this time in 1776, you got to think back in 1775. I mean, there was already battles that had been fought with the British. It wasn't a peaceful period, and you had these founders meeting in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, committing treason, essentially. And those that supported them, or certainly did not speak out against them, could also be committing treason. And so this is several weeks away from the official Declaration of Independence. Although, as I was researching this, there were different moments where different founders thought that they had actually declared independence, that they were already there. But we look at July 2nd, 3rd, 4th, obviously, as that period for our country. But this is true. This is real. This took place. And the leaders in these communities were encouraging the public to reflect on their situations, to essentially confess their sins and to have a moment of meditation, for lack of a better term. We could prayer, meditation, reflection about where they were in the moment, where they come from in the past, and where they were going in the future. Very interesting to know that that was an American tradition and to see what traditions have been carried forward and which traditions have gotten lost along the way. So I was just sort of fascinated with the fact that this actually happened. And through all my different research throughout the years for Smarter News and otherwise, I mean, here I've been a journalist for more than 20 years and always look to weave history into our coverage. I didn't really know that much about this stories. I'll make sure to put this in the show notes. You can actually read the whole piece by John Hancock, what is being encouraged for the public. And you might find it interesting, especially as we're marking this special anniversary. So I thought you might enjoy that. It also gives us a little bit of a moment of reflection ourselves away from the politics. There's a little bit of controversy, by the way. I say a little, as you know, it could be a lot, it could be a little. There was controversy around this event that was a prayer event on the National Mall supported by the administration because most of the leaders were Christian. It wasn't a multi-denominational event of prayer. It was very specifically dominated by Christian leaders. And so there was some question about whether or not there was a violation of church and state, um, but it didn't stop the event from happening. And there apparently was one Jewish leader that spoke, but most of the speakers were from a Christian background. And so will argue, well, that is also the foundation of America, that there was a background in prayer and Christianity. Uh, but as you know, these debates come up periodically about the mixing of government and prayer. So that was part of this event a little bit as well. But it did take place. Thousands of people apparently showed up at the National Mall. And this is part of the events leading up to marking America 250, which we expect in a few weeks. We're almost there. So, on that note, let's dig in. I have two legal cases I want to break down for you. And one of them actually has to do with the National Mall. So, since we're already there, I thought let's just stay there because this is such a visible landmark. I just want you to know what's happening in case, surprise, surprise, it looks different to you in a few weeks, or it looks under construction, or it looks the same. You should know about this iconic landmark. We're talking specifically here about the reflecting pool. So, this was completed in the 1920s. It was in the opening of the Lincoln Memorial. The last major renovation was in 2010, 2012, cost $34 million. So this is the National Mall. You have the Washington Monument on one side, you have the Lincoln Memorial on the other. You have a variety of different memorials and monuments on either side of it. It's a major focal point of Washington, D.C. It is problematic over the years. There's a lot of maintenance issues related to it. And in fact, one of the issues is during the last major renovation 20 years ago, apparently they installed the wrong size water system pipes, and that makes the pool lose a lot of water, which is a problem. Costs can exceed $1 million in water losses alone. And then you also just have the maintenance of it. This is one of our most popular videos that I've shared at Smarter News. And for those listening on podcasts, you can just imagine what would we call this? Like a little bulldozer of sorts? Don't quote me on that. I need a cheat sheet on my different gear that could be used to clean the reflection pool, which is that stretches between these different monuments and memorials. The pool gets really dirty. Bird droppings are a major issue. And every year there's a spring cleaning event that has to take place where they have to drain the pool and they literally have to scrub it, which is what you're seeing because it just gets so dirty and smelly. And as you know, Washington, D.C. was built atop an actual swamp. And because of the humidity and everything else you got going on there, this can turn into a very lovely, wonderful place into kind of a stinky, dirty place. And we don't want that because this is, again, a national landmark. It is an icon. So, what's happening? President Trump, in his effort to clean up Washington, D.C., has decided to do something different to this reflection pool. And that is to make the coating of the pool blue, American flag uh, blue, exactly. So the reflecting pool that usually looks a little dark, a little mysterious, is going to have a brighter, bluer bottom. That's what President Trump would like to see. And he's made statements to say such. This is going to be beautiful American flag blue. There are those that do not like this. In fact, a nonprofit sued the administration, filed paperwork just last week to say this cannot happen. And let me read to you a little bit of what they had to say. Again, this pool itself is 104 years old. And they say the attorney that's representing this group says the dark gray basin was not incidental to the design. It was the design. And in fact, the 1999 National Park Service Cultural Landscape Report for the Lincoln Memorial Grounds specifically identifies, this is according to NBC News, the dark tiled basin as a character defining feature of the historic landscape, noting that the dark color of the tile created the illusion of greater depth and more profound reflection. So they're saying this is all intentional. It's supposed to be dark. It's supposed to be sort of this area that you see the reflection of the nation's capital, but it's not flashy. It's not supposed to look that way, and there's a concern about it. So the lawsuit says the new coloration will cause the pool to resemble a large swimming pool. By the way, it's illegal to swim in the reflection pool. So if you had that thought, you can't do it. It's illegal. Don't do it. Okay, you did not hear that from me. Let me go back to read. The new coloration will cause the pool to resemble a large swimming pool rather than the reflective civic landscape it was designed to be, distorting the experience of the site for the millions of visitors who come to it each year. So this is sitting before a judge. Here's the catch, though, guys. As you can see on your screen, the renovation is already happening. Part of the pool is already getting the blue bottom. And there are some that say that what you would actually see from ground level would not be this bright blue pool like a swimming pool. I don't know if you guys are imagining. What I'm imagining is some resort pool, that really fake blue sort of. That's what I'm thinking. There are those that say because of the way the shape and the length and all of that, it would appear brighter, but it would not appear like what we might be imagining, like a YMCA pool. That's what I'm kind of imagining, okay? It wouldn't necessarily look that way. However, from above, it may look brighter, significantly brighter blue. So the question here with this lawsuit is like, what actually happens? And of course, the nonprofit saying this is a pattern of behavior by the Trump administration. They're not coming to cultural preservation groups to say this is what we want to do and seek approval. They're just going ahead and doing stuff. And people don't like it because they said there's a process for this. These are national landmarks. These are historic sites. There has to be a process that we follow. We can't just start doing this. This is the argument. The Trump administration is like, we can fix that quickly. We're going to fix that fast. And we're going to do it cheaper than others. This is part of their argument. And it's going to look great by the July 4th holiday. Doesn't everybody want that? Let's just get this done. So you have the tension between the two. And what I see really is the bigger story here. I mean, obviously there's politics at play with most stories, but it's also just a question of that tension between the past and the future. The way things are versus the problems that are actually the reality and what they could or could not become. And so I really pose this question to you of how do you feel about this? You could wake up a couple weeks from now and the whole reflection pool at the National Mall is blue. That could actually happen. It's a real reality. It also could be that there's no agreement here. And for some reason, there's a court order that could stop this. And then the pool may not have water in it for the 250th anniversary. Or could part of it be done and the other part is not? I mean, there could be a lot of scenarios here. So this comes up. Although this is a very high, recognizable site. I'm sure you see this in your own cities and towns and areas, which is there's an effort to change and to modernize. And there's also just a real nostalgia about the past and not wanting to lose the essence of what was there and why it was put there. So how do these two things come together? I'm not sure. But it is such a visible part of Washington, D.C. I don't want you to get caught off guard. And really, as we go back to the bigger picture, it is that tension of what was the past in America And what do we want the future to be? And also, if there were problems along the way and there's a new solution in how to fix them, how do we do that in a way that both honors the past and keeps the essence of a project, but also does the thing to make it better? I don't know if the blue paint is part of that. By the way, there's some drama over the contractor too. Apparently, the contractor was not, there was no competition for this. President Trump gave it to somebody, apparently, according to reports, that had worked for him for a prior property and just said, go and get this done. The initial bid was a couple $1,000,000, but now it's exceeded more than $10 million. So there is some detail here that's going to matter. But the visible part and some of the questions that come with it, I thought you'd find interesting. So I wanted to make sure to cover that for you as well. All right, let's move to our final story of the day. And this is a very emotional, highly controversial topic. We're going to speak about it pretty plainly, but I think probably okay for mixed audiences. Depends on how you feel. I like to make sure that news is family friendly. This could kind of vary into an area that is harder to discuss amongst mixed age groups. So just a heads up on that. But it has to do with something that's happened in our country over the last several years, a new way of looking at the Constitution and a new way of looking at constitutional rights, and how states are trying to hold their own sovereignty, which, by the way, also takes us back to America 250, where the concept for the United States were these strong states that were united, individual, but then united for a cause and a country. And that tension between the states and the federal government is one that has played out in a variety of ways with our history. This one has to do with abortion law in America. So let's just start there. So if we go back to a couple years ago, we had a big ruling from the Supreme Court that overturned Roe v. Wade and basically said, we're going to push the abortion law back to states. States are able to make their own laws on this particular medical procedure, and every state has the right to determine how they want this law to function. And so, because of that, we have a variety of different laws. It is true in some respects, we see more permissive laws when it comes to abortion. It is also true in other respects, we see a lot more restrictive laws. In the meantime of this, in the aftermath of this, there have been a few cases that have come up as states are trying to figure out how do they enforce their own laws? What does that actually look like? And also, what about outside influence? Let me give you an example. In the state of Texas, there was a case that's come up where there is a doctor, a physician from out of state, in this case, it's New York, prescribing certain medication to individuals in the state of Texas that will enable these individuals to have an abortion. The state of Texas wanted to extradite this doctor from New York to face charges. New York now has put in place these shield laws that says, nah, you're not going to be able to reach into our state and get anybody. There's a shield law protecting these physicians. So that's a standoff that could continue to play out and has continued to play out in court, because Texas is like, wait a minute. How are we supposed to enforce our own laws if people from the outside are giving our citizens ways around it? Doesn't that make them a criminal? This is part of the conversation. Louisiana has a different case though, and it's a fascinating case because we're looking at it related again to abortion, but one wonders, how does it also apply potentially to other aspects? So let me just give you kind of an overview of this. So in order to understand this, we also have to talk about what is commonly described as the abortion pill. And this is hard for me to pronounce. Every time I do it, it's hard. Guys, I apologize. It's just one of those words, mifepristone. I have a hard time saying it. But that's why people say abortion pill, because quite frankly, it's hard to say. This medication is used in conjunction with another medication commonly to induce an abortion of a pregnancy. It has been FDA approved for more than 20 years. And in 2023, the FDA did something else. They permanently allowed this medication to be mailed and distributed through the use of telehealth. So saying if I jump on a telehealth provider and I am prescribed this medication, that can be available to me. It's not state specific. It's just the FDA says this is the way that this medicine can be prescribed. As you know, some medications you have to go in person to be evaluated. You know, you want your blood pressure, they want your heart rate, they want to know certain things, and then maybe they're going to give you a prescription. But the FDA said, no, in this case, it's been used. We feel like it's safe to use, and we think this can be permanent. Now, that was under the Biden administration. This is in the aftermath of the Supreme Court ruling on Roe v. Wade. There were questions about politics being involved in this decision. We're going to leave that aside. We don't know at this time, but that's what the FDA ended up doing. There has been a lot of pressure on the FDA in the years after that to review that ruling because there are some that say, wait a minute, this medicine should not be prescribed just through telehealth. This needs to be supervised by a physician that's nearby. It can't be, someone that's not seeing this person in real life. And so this has been a debate. So Louisiana actually took on the FDA and is arguing that this mm, kind of mail delivery service for this particular drug has harmed the state's ability to enforce its own laws and also cost the state money. So what they're saying is it's harming our citizens because we have laws in place and we've been elected. And it's harming our citizens because this is allowing them to go around the certain laws in place. But also, it's costing us money because these people that are not being supervised and are getting this medicine through the mail are winding up in our emergency rooms. They don't have care and they are then costing the state money for care. And so we're being harmed by this, and this needs to stop. So, Louisiana, interestingly, didn't go after a physician, didn't go after telehealth, went after the FDA and says, this, we need to reverse this because it's causing us so many problems. And by the way, other states could have similar problems as well. What happened is there was an argument in a lower court that said, was appealing to a panel of judges that basically said, as this case is working itself through, these drug makers should not be allowed to let these drugs be available. While we're sorting this out, this should not be available in this way anymore. Like, we need to pause this. We should temporarily pause this sort of telehealth medicine prescription of this medicine while we sort this out. And a panel of judges agreed with that in Louisiana. However, there was an appeal to the Supreme Court because this medicine is widely used across the country. And the drug makers were like, "What? Wait a minute. What's going on here?" The Supreme Court kept on sort of delaying their ruling on this, but late last week, and again, they're not looking at the entire case, they're looking at whether or not they should temporarily stop this medicine from being allowed to be prescribed and administered this way. They decided to not step in. And so as of today, this medication is still available via telehealth services around the country. And the Supreme Court kicked it back to the local courts, the local district courts in Louisiana. So the case is not over, and it's still a really interesting case. But also interesting is that the Supreme Court, which often is described as more conservative because there's more conservative justices that quote unquote conservative justices appointed by Republican presidents in this court, uh, decided not to necessarily fall in line with what would be believed to be the conservative paradigm about this medication. So there were some dissenters on this, but not enough. And the court said, no, we're not going to step in here. We're not going to stop the prescription of this medicine. We're going to allow it to keep going. It needs to keep working its way in the court system. That said, this case could very likely wind up in front of the Supreme Court. And then we would have a very interesting showdown again related to abortion in this country, because what we're seeing statistically is a question really how much Roe v. Wade and the overturning of that law has impacted the procedure nationwide. And so there's a question about that. And as I mentioned, all of these different states are kind of figuring out, well, how do they actually enforce the law they say their representatives say the people want? And here's the bigger picture here, which I think is really interesting, which is technology allowing the subversion of state laws in a way that's going to have to be addressed? You may or may not agree with Louisiana's laws, but it is part of their argument that this technology is allowing a law to be broken inside their state. So let me give you another example. There's a lot of different gun laws in a lot of different states, right? Gun laws are very specific to states, and there's federal gun laws. But there's a new technology, 3D printing, that allows people, if they want to create and build their own weapons. They don't have to register or do any of those things that you would typically have to do if you were in certain states, because technology is allowing them to move around it. And I just wonder what other ways technology, here in this case, telehealth, something that maybe even 5 years ago, a lot of us probably were not utilizing as much as now, is weakening the argument of the states is of their ability to have the rule of law. Now, some will say, Well, that's a good thing because those that don't agree with the state law want a way around it, but don't necessarily want to move out of their state. So again, a story. I'm very curious how you feel about this. And are we in this time period? We have these two different kind of views of states coming up when it comes to technology. Here's one where technology, the state is arguing in the course of their argument against the FDA, technology is allowing the subversion of their laws. Then we see other state legal cases where the federal government, for example, hasn't been necessarily successful against social media companies, or like the state cases against these social media companies have been victorious for these states because they're able to prosecute using their state laws, a technology company in a way that the federal government cannot. So it's a very interesting time with this legal maneuvering by states. And I'm asking this question about state rights because I am curious about that, which is that's always been a part of the American political process. Strong states, sometimes weak states, we get into kind of ebbs and flows of this because of technology. I wonder where we're going to stand. And so is that really the bigger picture here? This is related to abortion law, very specific medication and telehealth. But is the bigger picture here how technology is and may be weakening law on a local level because it provides us so much access and opportunity? So, very curious your thoughts on that. And this is something we're going to be watching. The Texas case I mentioned and this Louisiana case both have the potential to perhaps reach the Supreme Court, which would allow the Supreme Court to weigh in again on abortion law in America. So, it's something that we should be aware of and continue to keep an eye on. So, we'll watch for that. Speaking of big cases, I'll just mention this briefly. There's a big case happening in Oakland, California. You have the tech titans, Elon Musk, facing off against OpenAI and Sam Altman, who's the leader there. And the jury has the case. And what the jury is going to have to figure out is whether or not Sam Altman and OpenAI lied, which is what Elon Musk is alleging, and that Elon's saying that he invested in this company thinking it was going to be a nonprofit, but that really the intention all along was it for it to be a for profit. And so a very interesting AI case. It's one that we can take a closer look at once we see what the jury says. And it's been one where we see some of our tech leaders, global leaders, in the same room, arguing their different sides. And you're kind of getting a background of how these companies, how did this AI company come together, and how there were different visions and concerns about AI even so many years ago. So something we'll be watching out of Oakland. All right, I'm going to leave you with this. This is a Wall Street Journal exclusive, and I wanted to give you one more thing to think about today as we head into summer travel. This in Boston Logan International Airport. Boston was important in America 250. And if you're going there this summer, you might want to think about this. So let me read you the headline. TSA experiments with off-site screening to relieve airport congestion. Pilot program for Delta and JetBlue customers at Boston Logan's airport could expand. Okay. What they're saying is starting next month, the TSA is going to have a screening outpost in Framingham, Massachusetts. Am I saying that wrong? Am I proving myself not to be a Northeastern person? I didn't say it with the Boston accent either, but I have a feeling I said that wrong. So please correct me. Shuttle buses will then whisk passengers who want to park at this outskirts area of the airport and get them roughly 25 miles to the airport where they will be dropped off beyond the security checkpoint, avoiding crowded parking lots, chaotic curbsides, and flight check-in queues. The move pushes one of the most stressful parts of the travel experience farther away from the airport. The off-site screening is a pilot project and initially will be available only for Delta and JetBlue. So passengers, what you're going to do? You check in, you drop your bags 25 miles from the airport. I'm sorry, I'm laughing because I think it's also you're looking at these policies, you're like, so a parent didn't write this, right? Like, can you imagine your stroller and everything else? But let's not judge. Let's continue. All right. Passengers are going to drop their bags. They're going to be at a remote terminal. Then they're going to get these coach buses to get them into somewhere in the airport where they don't have to wait in line, which does sound great. But 25 miles sounds far. Oh, and by the way, you have to pay for parking. I think it's $7 a day. It's not a lot. Yeah, but it adds up, right? Landline service costs $9 for a one-way ride, and parking in the area will cost $7. But it's this way of trying to figure out how to make the lines not so bad. So my question amongst many today is, would you try this? Does this sound relaxing to you? There's so much part of travel that's not relaxing. I'm just wondering about dropping my bags 25 miles from the airport and having faith that they will make it there and onto my flight. But walking into the airport like I'm riding on a private plane might feel good. Do I get coffee? Like, is there like a private lounge? I mean, I feel like there's ways to make this good. I don't see any of those perks, but maybe they'll take that into consideration. But you don't have to have the traffic at the airport. And by the way, I almost missed a flight the other day. I thought I gave myself plenty of time, and there was a new construction at our airport in Austin, and I almost missed the flight. So I don't know. Off-site TSA screening. I mean, they have all of our biometrics, don't they, at this point? Could we just kinda whisk our way through? I don't know. I don't know what the right call is, guys. It is really remarkable to think the TSA wasn't a thing until after 9/11. We're gonna be marking 25 years since 9/11 this September, but it's just a reminder that things weren't always this way. And so, are there new ideas to consider that could make our lives easier and better? And how can technology help us with that? Or maybe something old-fashioned like getting screened somewhere else? So, the live chat here with our smarter insiders is skeptical. I'm just going to summarize. They're a very open, curious group of people, but they're skeptical. I see a quote from Patty: "No way." Kristen said, "Maybe if they offered me a discount on my flight." I love that idea. I'll experiment. Uh, but Natalia, thank you, Natalia. Nope. Rebecca says, "Sounds horrible." Yeah, Jeremy says, "I don't think so." Sounds like one more thing to go wrong and make me late to my flight. I'm thinking about that coach bus in traffic too on the way to the airport. You guys, maybe we need to be more optimistic. All right. I don't know. But right now, the Smarter News insiders say, no way, Jose. And so we'll see what happens. It's going to launch in a couple weeks outside of Logan Airport. So if you're curious about that, maybe you're local to the area, check it out and take a video for us because we want to see. Like, we're excited about this. We may not want to try it, but we want to know what it's like for you. All right, guys, a lot of news coming up this week. I know it's a busy one going into the Memorial Day holiday. Thank you so much for your support of Smarter News and all you do to create a solution in news. I hope this is helpful for you as we deliver quick, concise, nonpartisan, smarter news, but sometimes a little bigger serving so we get you ready for the week ahead. But appreciate all your support, and I hope you have a great week wherever you are, in the airport line or otherwise. All right, guys, have a good one. Bye.